everyone, and welcome to another Scots Whay Hae podcast. And today I'm joined by writer Frances Crawford to talk about the debut novel, A Bad, Bad Place, which is out now, published with Bantam. Hello, Frances.
Hi, Alistair. Thanks a lot for asking me on, Alistair.
It's a real
Very
pleasure,
sure.
and you've got a copy of the book there. I've got my copy here for watching on video. And
And
actually, we'll talk about the cover because it's quite a strap. Oh, you've got. Well,
that's
let's talk
cardboard
about
said
that.
version.
Let's talk about that straight away because you've got a picture of the dog, Sid
Yeah,
Vicious.
that's him. That's cardboard said vicious. The penguin sent a whole bunch of them, so I'm really proud of him. He looks great. I mean, it's a brilliant cover. I'm so lucky that it's such a great designer did it, and people will say to me, love the cover, oh, it's well done. Like I had anything to do with it, but I'll take the kudos anyway.
Well, quite right, aye. But who did design it?
It was a Polish designer, Alexandra, uh, oh goodness, I can't even pronounce her second name, but she generally does murals in Poland, beautiful big murals connected with wildlife. And I don't know who came up with the idea that she would do a good Sid Vicious, but it's so well done. I'm so lucky.
Well,
It was a wee bit unexpected because it is a crime novel, uh, but I love it now. I really do.
I was thinking it would make quite a striking tattoo. You know,
Wouldn't it? Yeah, I know a few people have said that last time, yeah.
and we'll talk later on about the whole because this is your debut. It'd be interesting to hear about your experience of getting published. But getting a cover is something that most people don't even think about, until much later in the process.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the entire process is completely new to me. I had no experience of publishing whatsoever. So every single stage of it has been a surprise, and some a lot nicer than others. And luckily, the whole art thing, I mean, my whole publishing team are absolutely amazing. They're so good, so nice and kind and helpful.
Well,
It's been really lucky with them.
I think we'll talk about that process later because listeners will be interested. But first of all, tell us about A Bad, Bad Place. How do you describe it to people?
Hey, A Bad Place. It's a crime novel set in Possilpark in the north of Glasgow in 1979. And the main reason I set it in 1979, I mean, sometimes I say it's like I can show how flawed the police were, and I can show poor treatment of victims, victim shaming, things like that. But really, it's because the music in 1979 is so good. I've filled the novel with punk rock, but it's about a dog walker, and you hear this right across the crime genre. That who found the body? Oh, it was that dog walker. Right, take their name, send them home. But I've always been really sort of uneasy about what happened to the dog walker next. And this is the novel. And in the novel, the dog walker is a 12-year-old girl. She lives in Possil with her Nana Maggie. And it's a dual narrative. It's Janey, Nana, all through the story. And it's the fallout of Janey's discovery of a mutilated body. She becomes tangled up in the police investigation. She gets dragged into gossip, the media. Everyone's interested in what Janey saw at the dummy railway when she found the body.
I think it's really interesting the setting of 1979 for the reasons that you say, and as you say, there's some fantastic references to the music of the time in particular. But it makes you think about how this story would play out differently today. You would have mobile phones, you would have 24-hour news, you would have social media, all the different ways that it would be in the present day. It was actually quite nice to go back in time and reflect on a slower time.
Yeah. There's also the huge leap in things like forensics. And that was another good reason for setting it in the 70s because I know nothing about forensics. I would have had no idea how the police would have investigated a murder in the late 70s. They had a couple of sniffer dogs, and that would be enough. But there's also a question of, how much has changed. The police treat the victims badly. The newspapers are they're very interested in this beautiful young woman. There's a lot of that sort of victim shaming that still goes on. So I hope people will see the parallels that although it is set in the late 70s, there's a lot of things have not improved.
Yeah, absolutely. So why was this the story for your debut? Were there other ones you considered, or were these characters in particular always going to be there?
To be honest, Alistair, I'd never planned on being a writer. I'd never planned on writing a novel. I went back to uni. My kids were growing up. That point where you have to decide, am I getting a motorbike or am I doing something safer? So it was a wee bit safer. And I did a postgraduate in creative writing, and I had Louise Welsh as my tutor. And Louise is absolutely amazing. I mean, not only is she a great writer, she's a great person, an amazing tutor. And while we were on the crime writing course, just something clicked. It was the way Louise's mantra is, it's never just about the crime. And she showed us all the different layers of crime fiction, that social problems, it can tackle racism, it can tackle gender. And at the end of the course, I handed in a short story. And Louise was very, very kind. She said, that the child voice in this could sustain a novel. I thought, well, who's going to argue with Louise? Well, so I thought I would just have a wee pop at it. And I never expected it to be published in a million years. I just really basically wrote it for myself and for Louise.
So if you'd never thought about being a writer, why was it creative writing that you chose to kind of get into in education terms?
So I've always been a really big reader.
Yeah.
It's that thing that I just thought it would be really nice to learn how writers got to where they are. I thought just to understand the mechanisms of the thing that I'd loved most in my life, music, reading, just my whole life reading. So it just seemed natural. It really did. And it was an amazing experience. I would recommend it to anybody. Don't go for the motorbike. Go for a bit of education.
Because I think that that's absolutely right. And there's so many people I talk to here that have come to writing increasingly through some form of education first. I mean, the course you did, the MLit, with distinction, I should add, you're in with distinction from Glasgow. I mean, that course has got a particularly great reputation.
It really does. It really does. But again, I would say to anyone who's even got a vague idea of writing, even a wee course at the library, you don't have to go the whole hog,
Yeah.
An online course, find a WhatsApp group, anything where you will get feedback, anything where you will interact with other writers, anyone that will say to you, that's a pile of shite or that's really good. Just you need a boost like that. You need backup and feedback.
Yeah, it's really interesting area of kind of modern writing, I think. But to go back to the book, sure, you've got these two central characters, and they're amazing characters of Janey and Maggie, and their kind of love for each other is what kind of drives the whole book in a way. But they're trying to protect each other as well. And you might think, well, how's a 12-year-old protecting this older woman? But Janey's been through a terrible experience. It's really traumatic. Was that quite difficult to write?
It was. It's not something I've ever experienced myself. And I did do a little bit of research on that, on children that had gone through traumatic experiences and on people who had actually found a dead body, a research that. And I found this really odd connection between the person and the body. Like if it had been a violent death, the person who found them would follow the case. They might go to court. They might follow the police investigation. if it be natural causes, they might go to the funeral. They have this feeling that the body somehow belongs to them. And children are they're very like that, and they become attached to things very easily. And Janey becomes very attached to the dead girl. And this kind of allowed me to make the dead girl Samantha a character of her own, because as Janey investigates Samantha, she wants to find out everything she can. Then Samantha becomes more of a fuller character. She's not just the dead woman, she's a flawed, nice person, she's up and down. Because quite often it's just they're just a body, even on TV police shows, it's that whole beautiful dead girl trope,
Yeah.
I was very, very keen to avoid that, so I hope I've done that.
Oh no, absolutely. And you were talking about Janey and Maggie, but your other characters are equally as memorable. You've got some fantastic, uh, memorable, complex, complicated people there. You've got career criminals who are broken-hearted. You've got other people. Don't want to go into them too much because I don't want to give anything away. But you have a real kind of complex, creative of different people. How do you go about populating your novel? Maybe you've got these two central characters, but then you have to bring in other people as well. Is that quite difficult?
Well, the setting of it, because it's set in Possilpark, and some of the characters are directly from my own childhood in Possil, and you get a bit tired of all the negative things you hear about Possil. I really do, and also about people who come from Possil. So I was very keen to show that even the gangster, the dad who's the gangster, he's also a bereaved father.
Yeah.
And people seem to think that if you're a bad guy or a bad woman, or you make your living through crime, that maybe you don't have any feelings, that you exist in this void. And that there probably are. I mean, there probably are really hard people that feel nothing, or just, I don't know. But in general, my own experience, no one's good, no one's bad, everyone's mixed, everyone's complicated. And populating the novel, a lot of the people did come from my own experience, in Possil. So
Have you had
I can't
anybody who's read
mention.
it? I'm sorry. Have you had anyone who's read it come up to you and say, that's me, or that was my dad, or whatever it might be?
So, thank goodness. I did change a couple of names of the pubs and things like that in case anybody recognised themselves as working in the pubs. But I did a really nice library event where I chatted about the book, and I joked about the thing about the names of gangsters. You see, when I originally wrote the novel and it was being edited, the original English editor said to me, "We don't like the Eggman. We think Eggman is too silly a name for a gangster. Could you make it a bit harder?" And I said, "Like, would you just Google Glasgow gangsters and have a wee look?" So I was on Zoom with her and I could see her, and she brings up Glasgow gangsters and the gerbil. Oh, Goofy. Oh, right. Specky. She sees that this is the way Glasgow gangsters are named. So I was chatting about that in the library, and at the end of the event, this woman came up to me and says, "Listen, don't say anything about him again." So I'm not mentioning this other person. She says he has got no sense of humour. So I'm being a bit careful about the gangsters now that I actually mention.
But it's interesting you mentioning library events there, because the library is one of the central locations in the book, and it's also evocative of the time and place. We know how much libraries are struggling in the present day. I would be roughly a bit younger than Janey in the late 70s, but I spent so much time in the library. That's where my
Yeah.
dad used to take me and my brother, set us down, and he would go away. And I mean, it was such a central place.
Yeah, and it was a special treat, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It's hard to explain that to people, that I thought it was just my mammy that had convinced us that going to the library was better than going to the pictures or something,
Yeah.
But no, lots of people have come to me and said how much they love the library as kids as well. It's just, and it's lovely to see that kind of community thing still going on. I mean, where I live now in Partick Library is brilliant. They've got all these lovely mothers and baby groups, and not just for the reading anymore. They've become community hubs, and I love to see that. I really do.
Yeah. I sometimes take my goddaughter, who's 3, down to Pollock Shields Library, and it's the same thing. She just loves it. That's
Yeah.
just a great place to be. There are books, but there are other things
Run
happening.
around now as well. It's none of that quiet.
So the two distinct voices of Janey and Maggie, they're your kind of narrators. Was it difficult or easy to jump between the two?
Well, um, what I had to make sure was that the languages were slightly different, the way they used language. Obviously, Maggie's got this sort of more old-fashioned way of speaking, more old-fashioned Glaswegian. She uses words like bahookie and wains, and that Jenny doesn't use because children speak differently from their parents, and especially different from their grandparents. So I was quite conscious of that, and quite conscious of making sure that what they spoke about was also appropriate for their age. I did not want Jenny to be too precocious, you
Yeah,
know. She's a wee girl, and
yeah,
so that was important. And Maggie as well. Maggie has this big rule about swearing, no swearing unless it's about Orangeman. So that's Maggie's rule. But Jenny does swear a wee bit when she's not with her gran, and I think that happens a lot as well.
yeah, yeah. No, their relationship is really lovely, and as I say, it goes to kind of the criminal world of Glasgow through the event that happens, through the connections that are there. But then they're both kind of drawn in, partly because they're trying to protect each other. So they become,
Yeah.
Maggie gets work in people in that world. And Janey's really the detective, isn't it? She's trying to get to the bottom of things.
She is, yeah, yeah. She would like to learn more about the dead girl, as I say. And in a way, it's her way of working through trauma as well. She's having nightmares and flashbacks about the state the body was in. And she feels that the more she knows about Samantha, the more Samantha will feel like a real person and not just a corpse. So that's the way I introduce clues and sort of suspects and red herrings and things like that is through Janie's attempts to talk to people who knew Samantha. There's also this thing of like it's a crime novel, but it's about the aftermath. It is about relationships, and as you say, they're protective of each other. So there's a lot of secrets.
Yeah.
Maggie keeps a lot of her past hidden from Janie to protect her. But Janie does the same thing with Nana. She finds out things, but she doesn't want Nana to know in case Nana worries. But children do all the time as well. They're very protective of adults in their life.
And I mean, it is definitely a crime novel. It's a kind of who done it. It's also a why done it as well. You know what that might be. Did you know from the start how this was going to unfold?
No, no. And I really shouldn't admit this, but I had no clue. And I changed the murderer as well. That crime novelists are not meant to do these things. They're meant to have proper course. It's meant to all be set out. And I just absolutely winged it. And I was quite surprised by the murder as well.
But that's interesting in itself because I've spoken to a lot of writers over the years, and they are surprised often at what their characters do or say, particularly do. So to be actually surprised about who ends up doing it, for want of a better term, that's interesting in itself. Do,
Yeah.
do you think you would think if you were writing another novel, I don't know whether you've started one or not, but you would do things differently? Do you think you've learned certain things along the way?
Well, the deal I signed with Penguin, it's a two-book deal. So I have to write another one whether I want to or not. And it is a wee bit different. You know, I'm very, very conscious now of the conventions of crime writing that I wasn't really thinking about before. And because I know now that it's getting published, I'm a lot more conscious of, is it good enough for, it's very different. When I wrote the Bad Bad Place, it was really just for myself.
Yeah.
And that was why I wrote it in dialect too. I wasn't imagining, like someone in Kent didn't know what Sannies were, or that the Americans wouldn't know what Iron Brewer was, and they don't know what Iron Brewer is. It was such an awful state of affairs. Yeah, so everything's different now. Yeah, but halfway through.
What was the editing process like then? Because I'm guessing there'd be quite a lot of the language that even folk outside of Glasgow, even folk, some of it maybe outside of Possil, might not know. So, it must have been interesting, that whole part of it.
It's very, very surprising. I mean, the original title was changed because I had originally called it The Dummy Railway. I thought everyone in Glasgow knew what a dummy railway was, and it's obviously these disused railway lines that runs through Glasgow. And up the north of Glasgow, up Possilpark Hill, it's called the Dummy Railway. I thought everyone knew what the Dummy Railway was, but no, it turns out not even anyone in the West End knows what it is. So the but the editors that I have now with Penguin, they were absolutely great. They barely changed a word. They accepted the dialect exactly as it was. And even it's getting published in America, and even the Americans were great about it. But they have added a glossary for the American version, which was really funny to work on. That was great fun. Um, there are so many Glasgow words for idiot. I mean, you see them all written down together. It's like, oh my goodness, why have we got so many words for idiot? Yeah, it makes you realise just how unique Glaswegian is.
That reminds me, I think this is right, of the first time I saw Gregory's Girl on television. It either had subtitles or had been dubbed, one of the two, and
Oh,
that's
that's
not,
awful.
that's quite understandable to me, but that's the case. And actually
I
spoken
can't even
to,
imagine that.
I spoken to Callum McSorley about his novel set in Glasgow as well, and he had similar conversations. And again, they seem to be, I wonder if now there's such a back catalogue of great Glasgow novels in dialect, because there's always been
Yeah,
great Glasgow novels, but perhaps only recently in such strong dialect that people are going, yeah, that's not a barrier anymore.
yeah. I think this sort of Shuggy McBain effect has been great for us all. That publishers are more willing to go with it. I mean, the reception has been mixed. Um, some of the reviewers just did not like the dialect at all. But I think that's just a matter of taste. It's just personal taste. I don't mind it. I love a book in dialect. I love Marlon James, and he's kind of a Jamaican patois. It's something that I like personally, but it's,
Yeah,
it's it's just a matter of personal taste. So
absolutely, absolutely. But I would have thought the success of James Kelman, but also Trainspotting, massive success, written in Leith dialect, would have put that to bed. I thought people can get into
yeah,
that, then they should be able to get into anything.
yeah.
But one of the things that grabbed me, as I said, there was so much that I could recognize and relate to the language they use, the specific details. Was it fun for you to go back and kind of reminisce about those things?
It was. It really was. I know it's obviously like 1979, as I say, I was right into punk rock at the time, so it was good memories for me, and all these great memories I had of Possil as well. Um, it's the Possil in the book is not the Possil that you Google. The Possil when you Google Possil, it's all these terrible statistics, poverty, murder. I think it was actually the murder capital of Europe at one point. Deprivation. I mean, all these things exist. It'd be ridiculous to say that they didn't, and it would be rose-coloured spectacles to write about that didn't include them. but there's this other side to Portugal where people are nice and kind to each other,
Oh,
where they do small kindnesses, all this community thing, and that was great to go back and think about that. To think about the good women, think about my old mammy and the way she used to help people. It was a great way of reliving nice things about Possum.
and we mentioned, have we mentioned Sid? Yeah, we did when we talked about the cover. Sid Vicious
Yes,
is
yes.
the dog, and he's behind
Yeah.
you. Sid, which is and that kind of shows you that the references that are in the book. I think you referenced the UK subs. Is that right?
Yes,
Are they
yes, I
one of your
do.
favourite ones?
Yeah, and the skids, I talk about them all the time because I love the skid.
So
Stiff
that
Little
we,
Fingers, Stiff Little
yeah.
Fingers got mentioned. Just all the best music, to be honest, Alistair.
But it's interesting because in the last few months, of course, we're coming up to, well, we're in 50 years since 1976. So really 50 years since punk kind of begun. And
I hate these things, these anniversaries, because it makes me feel
well,
terrible.
it's a lot of reflections on it, but how do you view the impact it had on you at the time? Because it clearly has had a big impact if you're still listening to the music to this day.
Yeah, yeah. It's quite hard to explain to other people just the huge impact it did have. I mean, for me personally, I met my husband because he was a punk. He played in a punk band called The Vague at the time, and he still plays in a band. The Dead Thatchers they're called now, so you can see he's not gone that far. But I mean, our two children exist because of punk rock. It was just so exciting, a really exciting time. And I'm not sure if music has the same impact on people's lives anymore.
Yeah.
You can't meet people in the record shop anymore, and that's sort of sad.
It's certainly getting more and more difficult to do those kind of things, I think. And yeah, been lots of music movement since, but there's something about punk which keeps us going back to it and
Yeah,
looking at it and as a whole, rather than just the music, the whole kind of cultural movement, partly because of what it was pushing against. I think it's really interesting that it's 1979 and not 1976, because really, I wonder if this was your experience. Punk didn't really make an impact up here until 78, 79.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. There's actually a brilliant novel on the go just now. You probably know Grant McPhee, Caledonia Screaming.
Yeah.
And Grant interviews just about everyone who was a punk at the time on 1976, and it's a very small amount. My husband Willie's in that book because he's so proud he was one of the first punks in Glasgow.
I have look, I've got my copy here.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, Willie's in that. But it's later where it catches on, especially with younger kids.
Yeah.
And Janey's just 12. But, she would have been far too young for like the Pistols and things like that anyway. And it's even right into the 80s that people were just becoming punks at the
Yeah.
time. It's a prime year, prime year.
Yeah. That's interesting. I had Grant McPhee on the podcast last week talking about the
Yeah,
book. I love what Grant does, and that's a particularly interesting read. And of course, Janey is starting to dip her toe into the fashions as well, which would be
yeah.
against what Maggie would think of that girls should wear.
She does not like the t-shirts that Jeannie borrows from her friends, She says some of them are not very nice.
So I'm interested again about going back to Glasgow, the Glasgow crime world, because did you have to do research for it, or was it all anecdotal? Was it all stories? Because Glasgow's full of stories about that kind of thing.
It is, yeah, and it was like kind of living in Possil. You know these people anyway. You know that uh, but I can't even say like who people are based on
No, no, no,
because
don't. Come back to
they're
what you
still
said in the
around.
library.
Yeah,
Fair enough.
uh, yeah, yeah. Knowing these things because you're amongst it, because you're brought up amongst it. And in the novel, there's one of the gangsters, the Eggman. He likes to carry his baby around. He's got this little baby boy, and there was a guy like that. Um, took the kid everywhere, took the baby everywhere, pushing his wee pram. He was just so proud of being a dad, and he was quite well known. And the original editor said to me, that's just not very believable. And I had to tell her that was the real, really happened.
That,
Yeah, so
you've reminded me of a story once I was in the Calypso bar. This would have been the late 80s, maybe early 90s. And in the Calypso, the actual bar bit, this was in beside Kelvin Hall. And no women in the bar. If you were,
yeah.
you had to go to the lounge if that was the case. But there was a guy sitting at the bar with his pint, and in comes a woman with her baby, says, "Right, I'm away to the shopping," gives him the baby, and he didn't even look up. It could have been anyone's kid, and just continued drinking. So absolutely, those kind of things happen.
Not even spill his pint, yeah. I'd forgotten that about not actually women not being allowed at the bar. That was a terrible thing, wasn't it?
And
It's funny how it's a living experience.
absolutely, in some pubs, I mean, Tennent's, I think, in the West End was on Byres Road was like that for a while. Anyway, certainly they didn't have women's toilets. It's weird to think about that. Again, going back to Glasgow's relationship with crime, this is something else I've spoken with Callum McSorley. It's an interesting one. Maybe that's the same in loads of cities, I don't know. But there's this kind of Wild West, almost infamy, I'm thinking towards a, maybe not so much these days, but in the 90s, you might go into a bookshop and there'd be a whole selection of kind of crime related books beside the counter
Yeah.
that you could pick up and go, oh, this is the story of whoever it might be. And you've got magazines like The Digger and Newsagents, which is all about that kind of world. It just seems such an interesting
Yeah, yeah,
symbiosis, I think.
yeah. It really is. I mean, it's the same in libraries. Huge rows of crime novels that Glasgow readers love crime. They really do. And I've been asked this quite often. Why do Glasgow people like to read about crime? And I really don't know. That maybe it's the way a crime novel offers some sort of resolution or some kind of there's always an ending. Things work out. And if you're seeing that kind of thing in the streets, if you're living with a bad guy next door to you, at least in the novel, you might get his comeuppance kind of thing. Maybe it's that, or maybe it's just, oh, I love these kind of guys, I
Kind
drink in
of
the pub with them.
anti-heroes, a little bit of that going on. I think it's
It sort of is, yeah.
small enough that nearly everyone has a story or some kind of.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
And it's a great city for telling stories. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, real crime is not the crime of novels. Real crime
No,
is horrible and
yes,
real murder, they are uh, they're traumatic and the fallout from them just it goes on generations. It's not something that should be glorified or anything. And that's why I think the distinction between real crime and fictional crime is it's very, very wide. It's a very broad, a very distinct line.
but I think your novel makes that absolutely clear because you've got a terrible crime at the beginning, which kind of kicks things off, and you all we've sort of mentioned this. You also dig deep into how traumatic it was and how many people are affected. This isn't light-hearted in that sense. It's
Yeah,
absolutely taking the crime serious and the repercussions
yeah,
seriously as
yeah.
well. Just as an aside, how do you feel about the popularity of real crime? Because there is there's lots of television, podcasts, radio
Yeah,
shows
yeah.
about it, and it's something I struggle with. I have to admit.
Yeah, yeah, it's not something that I'm interested in personally. I'm very I'm a bleeding heart for these things, I just can't stomach them. It's goodness, especially if it's about women. I just I have to look away. I have to turn it off. But I know that my daughter loves it, and I know that some people just absolutely love it. And I find it difficult to just say why, but I think it might be the way it's presented, where
Yeah.
it's presented almost in a fictional manner. Or maybe it's just that people are very interested to know what goes on in the world. Maybe the way that you watch a documentary
Yeah.
and you're learning. It could be that.
I've
It's just,
heard the argument that some people get to tell their stories who maybe have been traumatized or are related to the crime that wouldn't be heard otherwise.
well, absolutely, yeah,
So I think
there is a
that's,
place for them. And
yeah.
I mean, things have changed because of podcasts.
Mm.
People have been let out of jail. I mean, they have their place. It's just not for me. Yeah,
Yeah.
as I say, I'm too much of a wuss.
Yeah, going back to what we were talking about right at the beginning, and this is your debut novel. What were the stages to getting published? How did you find it? And were there surprises along the way?
Yeah, well, when the novel was finished, I had a couple of points where I was almost giving up. I mean, I guess every writer does, but I finished just as I graduated, and I thought, I'm going to go by the steps that we were taught. I'm going to look for an agent. Um, and my really small, very tiny hope for it was that perhaps one day it might be taken up by maybe an indie publisher in Scotland. And that's why my maiden name's on it, Crawford. I just thought that sounded more Scottish, and I thought, well, maybe a Scottish publisher will sign it up. And I was just really surprised and dead lucky. It was that right place, right thing, right place, right time, and I got agent interest. And I eventually signed with AM Heath, and they were they are two amazing agents that I have. Ewan and Ollie, I just can't praise them enough. They said they took the book everywhere, and so sorry, it just seems still really surreal that it happened. I met Ollie at bloody Scotland, and
Right.
Ollie was there with some of these other writers, and we had a few meetings with publishers. I went home that week, and Ollie sent an email saying, "Congratulations, you're going to be a published writer." Not only have we had a preempt on the book for this huge amount, but we believe that it should go to auction because there are just so many publishers interested. And to make it really more surreal, my husband and I were in Lidl and we were looking at the wonky veg, these
Yeah.
bent carrots and things to see how many of these mad carrots we could. And I had this email up and saying, "You're going to be a writer and you'll be able to sign off benefits. You'll be able to." I says, "Oh, Willie, let's get the straight veg. Let's go for the good stuff."
Let's get the
It
good
was
stuff.
a mad thing. It really was. It was great. And that was one of the brilliant things about it as well, was that being in benefits for a long time and see to go and sign off like that. It was amazing, absolutely amazing. The whole
Uh,
thing changed our lives. Not just for me, but for the whole family.
uh,
It's been amazing. I'm really, really lucky, and I want to point that out. There are millions of better writers than me, better stories. It's just right place, right time for getting published.
that's an incredible story, Francis. But there are a couple of interesting things. I think doing the creative writing course, that has sounded as though it's been a practical help as well as, critiquing your writing and all that stuff. You'll get to meet other people that are doing the same. You'll maybe get in front of agents that you might not done. And it sounds increasingly like
Absolutely,
agents are
yeah.
important too.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. You learn the process. And there were things I thought at the time were a wee bit kind of like, oh, what we're doing this for? And it was this kind of thing, where you sit in front of the class and you discuss your work. And I thought, well, I will never need this. Why are we doing this? But it's part of the whole thing of promoting your book. It's an amazing course. It's an amazing experience. Being part of the whole thing like that. And that would be my advice to anyone thinking about it. It doesn't have to be uni. Open University do
Yeah,
a great courses as well.
yeah.
Libraries, anything where you can get yourself talking about your writing. get feedback on your writing.
Yeah, feedback. I think it's such because you used to have the stereotype of the writer stuck in their room, writing or typing away or whatever it was, and then they come out with this finished thing and that was it. Whereas even the greats going back to Alistair Gray and Tom Leonard and Kelman himself and Liz Lochhead, they did writing groups. They were part of writing groups
Yeah,
who would
yeah,
feed back to each other and hopefully support each other and make themselves better. So
absolutely, yeah, yeah. And I mean, you think the publisher will get your book or your agent will get the book, but that's it just started.
yeah,
That's the start of the editing, and you're talking about years. It was 2022 that I graduated, so it's like a 4 year process. Although it did happen quite quickly for me, the original signing, and it's a 4 year process for me editing, rewriting. I mean, I sent the book off with a huge plot hole in it, and I'm so embarrassed to think back on it now that I thought I had edited it so well. The editing is a huge part of the writing.
yeah. Well, it's interesting. I worked as an editor for a while, so from the other side of that, it's one that has to be a real close and kind of trusted relationship, I think. But also, from a writer's point of view, sometimes you're so close to it, you've read something so often that you just can't see.
Yeah, that's it exactly. Yeah, and editors have a huge job, a huge part of getting that book out. I don't think they get enough kudos. I really don't. That the editing process is so complex, and I mean, not only are you pointing out the plot holes, you're finding the good parts of it and foregrounding them a wee bit more. It's the editors do amazing work. They really do.
So once it's gone through that process, it's edited, it's signed off on, what's next? Do you just then kind of sit back and let the publishers do the work, or is there other things to do?
There was a wee period where basically nothing happened, and publishing had dates when books are released,
Yeah.
and I did not know that either at the time. And you're given a date some point in the future. Um, because I'm part of one of the big publishers, Transworld, who I signed with, a part of Penguin. There's a lot of really great things for me to be part of. The crime world is amazing. The crime writer world is so supportive. They've all these great festivals, there's Bloody Scotland, Teakston, and other crime writers are so supportive. You've maybe heard this before, but they are so good to each other. And they made me very, very welcome. And I've been book signings. Oh, it's been great. An amazing process. I thought I would just quietly beaver away in the house. I would never leave the house again. But the process, the whole being part of the book while publishing, it's huge. It really is,
It's
and
something
it's really lovely.
it's something I've spoken about with a few writers, Louise Welsh being one of them actually, and thinking, you write such dark, dark things, but you all seem such lovely people. It's such a real, and it reminded me of the Goths at school. They looked quite scary, but they were the loveliest folk you could ever meet.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. Goth's got a bad name. Goth,
Absolutely.
Goth are maligned. But yeah, I have not met a single crime writer who has been even slightly standoffish. They've all been lovely, and I need to get on top of this. But I'm such a fangirl, and I've made an absolute clown of myself many, many times. And people will say, "This is Val McDermott," and I go, "Oh, Val, I'm in love with you." And Val's wife was not too happy when I said that. I get people's name wrong. I was introduced to the guy that writes Reacher. Oh goodness, what's his name?
Yeah, it's slipped my mind as well. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and he's a
Jack
lovely.
Childs. Jack Childs.
Yeah, yeah, he's a really nice guy. And I said to him randomly, "Have you ever seen the Loch Ness Monster?" Because he was talking about Scotland. I made myself an absolute idiot just because I'm thinking these are all my heroes. These are people I've been reading for years, and here I am in the same room as them. I need to get to grips with myself. I mean, I seen Callum skateboarding in Kelvin Grove Park one day. I thought, no, I'm not going to go up and talk to him. Yes, yes, I'm going to go. No, 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 I won't. You know, Callum's a really nice guy.
Oh, he's a lovely guy.
He's dead ordinary and kind, and he's supportive. And but I just couldn't even go up and say hello, Callum. I loved your book.
I think.
I think I'm getting a wee bit better there, though.
But you mentioned Bloody Scotland, which is an amazing festival. I'm lucky that every year they ask me to do podcasts with some of the shortlisted writers and stuff like that.
I think you're doing our panel this year,
I
Alistair.
am. I am. I
Yeah,
didn't know whether you knew that or
on
not,
the
but I am
Sunday,
doing it.
yeah.
And I'm really looking forward to it as
The
well.
Glasgow banner or
Yeah,
something it's called. Yeah, yeah.
I can't wait for that. But you've won the Bloody Scotland Glencairn Crime Short Story competition, which I did not
That was
know.
amazing. Yeah, yeah. That was one of the points where I had decided to give up on the novel, and then this came through the short story, and I only entered it again because Louise had highlighted it to the class and said you should enter. You know, a lot of you have done great stories, and when I won it, I thought, you know, maybe I should just go back to the novel. Maybe I should just finish it. These prizes are so encouraging for
Yeah.
writers, really important.
What was your short story about, just briefly?
It was the same. It was Janey's voice,
Right.
on the point where Janey finds the body. It's slightly different, but it was the sort of outline of the basics. I think because it's child voice, and it was a wee bit different that they liked it, you know.
And now that the novel is out, well, you've maybe hinted at this. You say it's a two-book deal, so is that what's next for you?
Yes, yes. It's set in Possil again. And there's a character in the first book called Martin. He is Jenny's friend, and he's a wee bit of an odd kid. He's a wee punk rocker as well, but he's older. It's 6 years in the future. It's the mid-80s, and I mean by this point, Possilpark is absolutely ravaged by heroin. It's a terrible time for Possum. But again, that's just the backdrop.
Yeah.
That's not the story's not about heroin. It's about Martin. Martin becomes tangled up in a murder because he's falsely accused of the murder.
Mm.
So again, it's a crime story, but it's Martin's story. These terrible things happen in Possil. It's the backdrop rather than the main focus.
That's lovely to hear because the relationship between him and Janey is a tremendous relationship.
Everybody liked Martin. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Frances, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I
Oh,
loved
thank
this novel
you.
so much, and just so much about it that really connected with me. So it's been great to be able to talk to you about it.
Thank you so much, Alistair, and for your support. You support so many great writers. It's an absolute wonder. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we'll be back soon with someone completely different.